You're listening to Sportly, an Immigrantly media production. There's a version of bowling that most of us know. Rental shoes, a beer in hand, bumpers if you need them, kind of musty-smelling bowling alley. And then there's the version that Jason Belmonte has dedicated his life to.
Life is a little different as a pro bowler.
I travel with a fridge because I can't eat casino food for a month.
Bowling is such a unique sport.
One with an invisible playing field that never stops changing, a grinding tour schedule, and stakes high enough to make your legs shake even after decades of competition. Jason, known to fans as Belmo, is widely considered one of the greatest bowlers in the history of the sport, and by many measures, might be the greatest of all time. He grew up in a small town in Australia where his parents built a bowling center from scratch, learned the sport all on his own, and pioneered a two-handed bowling style so unconventional that his pro-level competitors thought he was cheating until they started copying him. He's won 15 major championships and holds records that may never be broken. And a few months ago, he appeared in Born to Bowl, an HBO docuseries that followed 5 players on the PBA Pro Tour to show what life off camera at that level actually looks like.
Breathe in, now breathe out.
I was kind of born into bowling.
To win a U.S. Open trophy was so emotional.
In this episode, Jason talks to me about what it took to get the bowling world to accept his style, the invisible and ever-changing nature of the sport's playing field, what it really feels like to compete for history, and why the respect that professional bowlers deserve has been a long time coming. Hey everyone, it's Kavitha Davidson, and welcome back to Sportly. The series is called Born to Bowl, Jason, and you were almost literally born into this. Can you give our listeners a little bit of your background? Your parents owned a bowling center in Australia, and that's kind of how you got into this sport.
So my parents, who were not bowlers, had never bowled a ball in their life. They had the idea to build a bowling center in a very small little country town that didn't have a lot to offer the community in terms of entertainment back in the early 80s. And so a couple of weeks after I was born, the bowling center doors opened for the first time. And my parents and my grandparents, they ran that business from morning to night, 7 days a week. And so as I was growing up, I was on my mother's hip, walking and running around the bowling center as a toddler. And my parents found out that a really good way to babysit me was to give me a bowling ball and a pair of shoes, turn on a lane, and they found that I was just really addicted to this game. And so I would bowl from morning till lunchtime break, have something to eat, go back in the afternoon, have some dinner, go back at night. And I did that, pretty much all of my days. And then when it was time to go to school, I would go to school. Then I'd go to the bowling center because mum and dad were working, and I did the same thing. The great thing about all of that, and it was a wonderful childhood growing up in a bowling center with arcade games, kids everywhere all the time. But for me as a professional bowler, I look back at that time and my style, I bowl very differently it's become quite normalized now. But when I first started, I developed this two-handed bowling style. And the reason was because I was so little, I could not pick the ball up traditionally, that one-handed swing. And so I wanted to do bowling by myself. I didn't want mum or dad to help me. And so the only way that I could bowl was with this two-handed technique. And as I got older, I just continued to do it. We didn't have any coaches in town, small little country town. Bowling was new, so we didn't have any pros. We didn't have anyone that knew what they were doing. And so I was just kind of left all by myself to kind of figure it out. And this is kind of how I figured it out. So fast forward 20, 30 years, this style of mine, it's changed my life, but it's changed the game of bowling. About 40% of the bowling population now have converted or adopted the two-handed kind of Belmo style. So it's fascinating to me to see how it's all started and where it's at now. But that's essentially my life. Yeah.
That didn't come without resistance, right? Because when you first, came onto the pro circuit, especially with your two-handed release, a lot of competitors thought it was cheating and said it was obviously non-traditional. Now, as you said, you fast forward and 40% of your competitors have adopted your style. What was it like to face that kind of resistance? What was the process like to get, for lack of a better term, legitimized by the rule book and everything around that?
Yeah, through different stages of my life, depending on my age, I think I've handled it very differently. So, when you're a teenager and a young adolescent child, you're really trying to just fit in with the other kids. And, there were definitely a group that, kind of didn't like the way that I bowled. And so you're kind of left on the outside of those groups. When you finally kind of find your people and they have your back, you have this kind of like, I can do anything. I've got my boys behind me. It doesn't matter. But each level I would go to would introduce me to a new crowd, a new audience of people that may have never seen me before. And so the one thing I'd noticed, in particular in the United States, is bowlers by nature love their tradition. They love their bowling and they love the way that their parents taught them or their grandparents taught them. And so, the resistance that you're talking about was closer to hostility. There's a lot of trash talking from the crowd. And to be fair, the parts in which I enjoyed it the most was actually where you're from, in New York. I'll tell you, you New Yorkers, when there's something on your mind, you have no problem letting anybody know what is on your mind.
No filter.
No filter.
No.
And so I had to get a pretty thick skin pretty quickly when traveling on the Pro Tour. But the key to my understanding of all of this was, once I was, and this happened very early on, but once I was very confident that my style was not breaking any rules, it became what people's preferences were. It became change. It became something different. And when I heard that hostility and felt that resistance, it wasn't because I was breaking rules. It was just that I was doing something different. So in my early 20s and mid 20s, that was a lot easier for me to understand. It was, hey, you know what? Not everyone's going to like this. And that's okay, because they have their own roots in this sport, their own history, their own identities. And so when something new is coming along and it's successful, it can be quite shocking. And what I think we're slowly understanding, or maybe not slowly understanding, but I think what we're seeing from a community and humanity respect is, when something is different and it's beating you, you tend to push against it very quickly rather than understand it or learn to understand it and accept it. You kind of just want to get rid of it. And that was kind of what I had felt and experienced. But luckily for me, my results made it really difficult to get rid of me. I just kept striking and I kept winning tournaments and I kept breaking records. And then what I was able to do was convince or have support of a huge percentage of the bowling community to be like, hold on, maybe this isn't all bad. Maybe I should try this. Maybe I should also bowl like this. And it's wonderful. It's wonderful to see, the younger generation in particular, which is a huge percentage now. Like I would hesitate to estimate what percentage it is, but it's well over 50% bowl the way that I do. And then, when they come up to you and they go, thank you so much for like paving the way, because it was really difficult to get my coach on board. But then I showed him videos of you and then he knew who you were. And it was so much easier to work with him once he realized that this was a viable style.
It's funny because you talk about kind of pioneering the style. You didn't have a ton of role models, I'm assuming, growing up in this sport, right? I mean, when I think of sports in Australia, I think of cricket and rugby and football, and I don't necessarily think of bowling. How did bowling come to the country and specifically to your town? Have you found a lot of American exceptionalism or gatekeeping in this sport that I think that we very closely associate with our country over here?
Yeah, well, bowling in Australia, comparatively to the US, is a very young game. I mean, America, I think the earliest bowling centers were in the very early 1900s, 1904 or 5 was the first bowling centers. I think in Australia, it was in the late 50s when the first bowling center came to Sydney. And how it came to my town specifically was, just as I mentioned before, my parents just had this idea for business. This wasn't something that they were passionate in. It wasn't that they had bowled themselves and were excellent bowlers. And so I think from purely a financial opportunity standpoint, bowling was a really, really, and still is, a really good idea for people to make money. So that's how I got introduced into Australia. And I'm sure very similar routes in the United States. In terms of role models, and you're 100% right. I didn't have anyone that bowled like me. I was the first of my kind as far as I was aware. And everywhere I would go, there was all of these traditional players. And so what I tried to do was find players that I loved watching compete and that were brilliant at what they did. And I would try to use parts of their game and somehow mold them into my game if I could. And so as you get to see, and as I traveled more around the world, I would meet more and more players. There'd be new players to kind of essentially steal, elements of their game and go, wow, their mental game is so strong. Like, let me watch them for a little bit and see if I can understand what they're doing. Oh my God, that guy's swing is so smooth. Like, how does he get his swing so smooth? Let me see if I can incorporate that into my game. And so I became my own coach, which for the good and for the bad, when I play well, I get to give credit to myself. And when I play bad, I've only got myself to blame. So when I started to see some of those players, it definitely helped me understand the game even more than what I did, because I didn't have anyone I could just go to the bowling center with and sit down and ask questions and talk about it. And we didn't have YouTube growing up for me. So it wasn't like I could just research these players globally. I had to kind of figure it all out on my own. And I think that's where I'm a little jealous of the American players today, the younger generation today is, you may have never have met me. You may have never have watched me bowl live, but all you have to do is type my name into YouTube and you can watch 2,000 videos of me bowling. And then you have coaches from all over the world uploading content, critiquing my game and pointing out the good and the bad. And so all of these kids are just absorbing all of this information. And so when you watch them bowl on tour now, and I compare myself to them at their age, they're light years ahead of me. And it's wonderful to see. I wish they had have come out a little later because I'm still on the pro tour. So I would have liked a few more years on my own out there. But watching them come out and just seeing how great they are, it makes a lot of sense on when you talk to them. They go, yeah, man, I've been watching you since I was 5 years old. And it makes me feel old, but it also, it's remarkable how technology has done that.
I think it's so hard to control for technology. I think it's so hard to control for different eras and different generations. Do you think that, one, pioneering your own style, so you couldn't really find a coach who could adjust their coaching style to your playing style, but also just growing up in Australia, do you think you benefited from a developmental standpoint of kind of having to forge your own path?
That's a really interesting question. I think the logical answer is no. It didn't benefit me. Perhaps in some areas of my game, maybe, to forge your own path, to create that fingerprint identity that's your own. Definitely think that's what happened to my game. But all of my skill sets, it took me trial and error. I didn't have someone, even the basic stuff, how to make simple spares. Like, no one told me how to do this. I just had to miss enough of them and then start to learn how to spare them and then figure it out. So I think from that perspective, I wish I had a coach for at least the simple basic stuff. But I also know that sometimes when you're coached, that coach has a methodology and ideology on how to bowl. And sometimes I can be really impressed into the student, and their own personal signature on their style can get lost a little bit. For me, it's all me. What you see, there is no influence whatsoever. So I think you've got to find a way to find that middle ground. How do if I were to coach a student, how do I allow them to be who they are and throw the ball that's supernatural and their own little fingerprint, but also guide them and help them find the basic fundamentals faster or create more solid foundations. So when they do put their own little signature spin on it, it's backed by a strong foundation underneath them.
I I watched the full series and it's fascinating. And I have actually covered bowling before, but I kind of cover the business of everything. So it was a nice kind of dip your toe in the world in this like one moment of, I believe it was last season that you guys filmed, correct?
Yeah, we filmed last season and then we're actually filming season 2 currently. So we have the green light to run it back, which is exciting. It is a really interesting watch because I think everybody knows bowling. I think you would have to go 1,000 miles to find someone who has never bowled before. You'd have to really travel to find someone. And so I think there's that real relatability to the game itself. But what we do on the Pro Tour is such a disconnect to how most people see the game of bowling. And so allowing those cameras in to follow the Pro Tour and some of the guys on the tour, I think has been, from what I've heard from people who have watched it, it's just been really eye-opening to kind of understand this tour is legit. It's serious. And there's a lot that goes on, not just on the lanes, but off the lanes as well.
Well, for sure. I mean, there's definitely some off-the-lane drama, but I learned so much just about the mechanics of the sport, from the ball construction and how that has evolved, especially since the early 90s, to the important role of oil in your sport. Do you find a lot of difficulty, because it is such a relatively accessible sport to the average person? Obviously, you guys are playing it at the 1% level. Do you find a little bit of a disconnect between people who watch and they think, oh, I could do that because I've bowled with a beer in my hand before, versus, the very intricate kind of technicality of what you guys do as athletes?
Oh, 100%. It's probably the most frustrating part being a professional bowler, because the main difference between us and a lot of other sports, in particular the mainstream sports, our environment, the oil that you mentioned, that's invisible. And so when we're competing in our environment, it is very, very different to what you see when you go down to your local bowling center on a Friday night. That oil is very, very different. Now, in golf, you can see the bunker, you can see the water hazards, you can see how narrow the fairways are, you can understand distance, right? Like, this is a 207-yard par 3. Like, that's a long way to get it in 3. In our game, those intricacies they're invisible to the naked eye. So we as athletes, and when we're competing on them, we can explain it and try to talk you through it. But without that visual connection to it, it is such a hard lesson to teach. So I think, one of the really cool things about the Born to Bowl series was it did try to open up that curtain a little bit behind those real subtle changes that we notice all the time, very obviously at the pro level. But a lot of the people watching probably didn't even know they existed.
It's interesting that you bring up golf, because I think the closest analogy is probably wind levels, right? Because you can't see wind, but you can feel the direction in which the wind is blowing. So that's at least something that a golfer can try to adjust for. For you guys, you have to gain a feel of your lane as a match is kind of ongoing. Can you talk about that process a little bit?
Yeah. So the very first thing that, I guess I can speak for all pro players in this regard, I think the very first thing that we're trying to do is get lined up. We want to find the optimum direction from release to the pins that gives you the highest percentage of strikes. So that's the first thing you're trying to find. Now, it's an invisible playing field, the oil. So we use our previous delivery to tell part of the story. So when we're practicing or when we're warming up, we're gaining some of that knowledge. Okay, if I throw it there, it doesn't hook enough. If I throw it here, it hooks too much. We're moving our feet, moving our target, changing our speed, changing our ball roll, and changing our equipment. And we're doing all of that in a really small amount of time, and we're trying to figure that puzzle out. The thing about bowling that makes it even more difficult is not only is it invisible, but it's forever changing. So we have oil. It's a physical, slimy substance on the lane. But when you roll a ball down the lane, your ball is affecting that oil. Your ball and all your other competitors' bowling balls going down the lane is constantly affecting that oil. So when I feel I'm lined up and I have the optimum angle to the pocket, within a frame or 2 or 3, that oil has now changed. Therefore, my ball motion is going to change, which means my result is most likely going to change. So I can't just, in darts, for example, if you stand in the spot and you throw it in the right spot and you just repeat that over and over and over, and you're really great at repetition, that dart will fly that triple 20 every single time. But for us, we can execute a perfect delivery. Everything was right. But now the oil has transitioned. It has moved. And the result is now a split. And for us, that is one of the most frustrating parts of our game because, yes, in golf, you can have wind that can pick up maybe while the ball is in flight. But let's just say hypothetically, there is no wind. If you hit your golf shot perfectly or you hit your tennis shot perfectly, the ball will go where it's meant to go. It will go perfectly where you want it to go. In bowling, we can execute perfectly and the result be disastrous. And that's one of the skills as a professional bowler you're trying to learn is how do I preempt that transition? Because you don't want to change too early because the oil may not have changed enough, but you definitely don't want to wait too long for a split to occur and then make your change. So you bang your head against the wall more times than you think as a professional bowler.
It's an incredibly unforgiving sport is what I learned from watching this show. One of the great dynamics that you can see in watching the HBO series is, you've got all these guys, the top of their game. Some of them are competing for their second U.S. Open or their third major. But you make a distinction where you say, I'm competing to be the greatest of all time. Where do you feel you land right now? Where do you feel you are in the arc of your already legendary career?
I understand how it can sound when someone asks, what's your goal? And I say, I want to be the greatest of all time. I know how that sounds. But every step along the way in my career, if you had have asked me, do you think you will achieve what I have achieved? Most people would have said no. I don't think he's going to win 32 times on the Pro Tour. I do not think he will break the record and have 15 major championships. I don't think he'll win the Player of the Year 7 times or bowl a perfect game on television 3 times. All of these goals and achievements seem outrageous before I had done them. So I asked myself, what's more likely? The fact that when I was a rookie to have achieved what I have now, or at this point in my career, reached the status of greatest of all time. And so I see that pathway for me and I say to myself, well, maybe it was difficult to get where you have, but you got there. So why not put up this ridiculous goal and push towards it? You may never reach it. Maybe I do not become the greatest of all time. But for me, it would be a regret if I didn't have that mentality moving forward when I would fully retire. So where do I think I'm at this moment? I think that I'm definitely in the conversation in the top 2 or 3. And my goal is if I win 20 major championships, I have 15. If I win 20 of them, that will double the next highest amount of major championships for a player. To me, doubling the next best in the history of the game is outrageous. So that's the goal that I have. And I think if I get there, it would be very difficult. Even if you absolutely were my biggest hater, even they would have to say, oh man, 20 major championships, it's pretty difficult to not give him the nod. So that's kind of the goal. That's how crazy it is. And I know how it sounds, but why not? Why not have that idea in your head?
You in 2020 accomplished a career Super Slam after winning the U.S. Open. What does that take? Because, I covered Serena Williams when she was going for the calendar slam. And one of the things that we saw with her is every tournament that she won, you felt that pressure being put on her even more. As you are going through that season in 2020, what does the second tournament look like, the third tournament look like? And when do you start to think, oh, I can win, I can run this out?
The interesting thing about pressure, and I would love to maybe stick my head full of probes so I could actually understand the wavelengths of what is going on in those moments. But the fascinating thing about pressure is something that you have done a million times, roll a bowling ball down the lane. I have done that a million times. the level of pressure in which I was facing in that season for that match, it felt like I was doing it for the first time all over again. There is doubt that comes into your mind, just ever so slightly, like, oh my goodness, you feel funny. What if you don't execute this perfectly? You will not have the opportunity to do something that's never been done before. So those thoughts come into your head, and your target, which may be the size of a beach ball for most of the game, when that last shot comes down, it's all of a sudden the size of a penny. And you're like, oh, you're blinking, your blurry vision is like you're trying to like clear your eyes a little bit. Like, what's going on? Why is that target so small? Why does it seem so far away now? But that's the moment that I think I have loved the most, is the appreciation for that feeling. Because you don't get to experience that every day of your life. You don't get to experience it really is a joy to be able to say, you're in a position that not very many people have ever been in. This is a privilege to experience this feeling. Yes, your legs are shaking uncontrollably. Yes, your heart is trying to rip itself out of your chest. But imagine never feeling these feelings. So I took an understanding relatively early into my career that whenever I felt that, I looked at it very much as a point of privilege and to enjoy it rather than be fearful of it. And as soon as I did that, it became a very positive experience. And now I thrive. I want those experiences more and more. Like, let me get into those positions again. Let me feel the shake of my legs and the heart rate. I want to feel it like I've never felt it before. And it definitely helps me execute when I look at it more as an exciting thing rather than a scary thing.
Billie Jean King, very famously, pressure is a privilege.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. You can only get diamonds from pressure. So, if I walk onto the lanes and I don't feel it, then I think that's a trigger for me to say, maybe this doesn't mean as much to you as it used to. Maybe it's time to not do it anymore and find something else that gives you that feeling. But for now, currently, I still feel it, which is a good thing.
Still like the first day you turned pro?
The first year I went pro, I think I was that leg shaking, heart pounding. 90% of my day was experiencing that. And every year you do get more and more comfortable in certain settings. But every time you do show up, especially when you're bowling for a championship and you're in that final round and you've got that opponent and it's now your turn to strike, to win or to lose, that moment, I wish I could explain. It's like going on the fastest, most wild roller coaster. Like, you can tell people what it's like, but you've just got to sit in the chair yourself to really experience that feeling. And that's how it is for me. And I love it.
Right. Now, you were 16 when you turned pro?
No, not quite. So 16 when I decided I was going to bowl for a living. Now, bowling is a little bit different to some other sports. Like most other sports, when you earn money, you become professional. Not in bowling. You can become an amateur and travel and earn money. And then becoming a professional means joining the professional tour itself. So I did that when I was 26, but I decided to be a traveling amateur from the ages of 16. Yeah.
And what was the moment where it kind of clicked that this could be more than just a high-level hobby for you?
It was actually my very first trip overseas. So I was bowling in Australia, and my really good mates in Australia had said, hey, did you hear that there is a tournament in Malaysia? And would you be interested in coming with us to bowl in the tournament in Malaysia? And I had very rarely left Orange to compete at this point, maybe to Sydney a little bit. And I said, holy geez, I'm going to Asia? Mum and Dad were still really busy with work. And so, I went with my friends we had some adult supervision, which, to be fair, they didn't really supervise us very much when we were over there. But we flew to Malaysia, and while I was there, I came second in the tournament, and I bowled a perfect 300 game, which had a reward of 15,000 Australian dollars at the time. So I came home with more money than I'd ever seen in my life as a 16-year-old. And on the plane going home, so I had two jobs when I was back at home at that point. I used to work for Blockbuster Video. So if you remember that, you know what that is.
R.I.P. Blockbuster.
Yeah, R.I.P. I'd like to think it was because I quit that Blockbuster decided to go bankrupt. I feel like I had an influence in their bankrupt story. But so I quit my job at Blockbuster, and then I also had a job with my father. And so I tried to keep that job at the bowling center for as long as I possibly could. But the more I realized, hey, you made so much money bowling. Let's go and find more tournaments. Let's go travel more and let's go win more money. And so for every tournament I would go to would be a shift or a week of shifts at the bowling center that my dad would have to cover for me. And so eventually that wore thin and he fired me. So that was a weird feeling, getting fired by your dad. But in his defense, it was a really beautiful way to do it. He said, hey, listen, I see that you're traveling, you're bowling really well. If you really do want to take this seriously, then you need to come here not to work, but to train. And you need to focus on that. So the firing wasn't out of, I was doing a poor job on the days that I was there. I think it was his way of telling me, go and get it. Have all the time that you need and focus on this. So I appreciate that to this very day because all of those extra hours I was able to give on working on myself rather than serving customers, I think really helped.
How has your success, if at all, helped your parents' business?
Yeah, that's we get people from all over the world. It's unbelievable. And when I'm in town, I make a point to go and visit these people, but they will travel from all over the world just to bowl on the lanes that I grew up on. And, mom and dad's social media, like they post about it every time. I make sure I come in. And in my head, it just blows my mind. Like, people will come from Tokyo. They'll come from Sweden. They'll come from the States. And, Orange, there's still, it's a beautiful town. It's a beautiful area, but it's a long way from, it's 4 hours. You have to drive 4 hours to get here. So, my mom or my dad will call me and they'll say, hey, are you free? Are you in town? Because we've got a couple of guys here that have come from the States that want to bowl on your lanes. So I drive in and I meet them. And, from that perspective, having, one of the best to have ever bowled a ball down the lane, I think mom and dad really appreciate that for their business. And obviously when I am home, I have children of my own, so they bowl league. So when I go in, I watch my own kids bowl league, but all the other kids come up and, they'll ask for photos and autographs. So I think from their perspective of how I've helped their business, I think it's just kind of showing the fans and the kids and the community that, when I'm home, this is where I still come. Like, this is where I want to be. I mean, I can choose to go anywhere in my free time and I still choose to go to the bowling center. So that's kind of the message I think mom and dad hope the community take. Hey, if you got nothing to do, why don't you come and do what Jason does? He goes bowling.
You're still Jason from the block.
I'm still Jason from the block. Exactly. Exactly. I'd like to think I'm not as crazy as Jenny in my older ages, but I don't know.
No, and I will say, as a born and raised New Yorker, we don't claim her anymore. So,
understandable.
One of the things that I think the docuseries does really well, I tend to cover labor and kind of the not fun parts of sports. And we only ever think of athletes in these very gilded terms. But obviously bowling can be quite lucrative, but it is a grueling schedule. It is a grueling travel regimen. A lot of your fellow players detail that sometimes you'll take home some money, but it won't outweigh the money you spent to get there. What are the main takeaways that you hope that people who are watching about this sport for the first time, what do they learn about just how difficult your lives are when you're on tour?
The key takeaway for me is something that bowlers throughout the generations at a professional level I have felt don't receive from the public is the respect of what we're doing. And as bowlers, when we hear someone say, oh, this is my dream and this is what I do for a living, it may not sound normal to us, but we bowlers understand what that means to that individual. And whilst we don't make the tens of millions of dollars that, golfers or tennis players or basketballs or baseballers make, we take our craft very seriously. We love what we do, and it is difficult. And when you mix all of that together and then you meet somebody and then they kind of laugh in your face at what we do for a living, we know immediately that they have no idea what we actually do for a living. Because if they knew, which is what I think this series on HBO does, is it peels back the curtain on how difficult it is. And we do this, yes, to provide for our families. Yes, it's not as lucrative as we would love, but the mental gymnastics and physical gymnastics that we put ourselves through to do something that we love, we just want people to understand that and respect that. And we hope to do the same for everyone that crosses paths with us that aren't bowlers. Like, oh, you do that? Well, that's cool for you, man. Like, we're really happy for you. And that's kind of, I think, if you ask most pros, what they wish is, just for a little understanding and respect. So hopefully that this docuseries, it does give that to a lot of people.
You are obviously in very good shape. We did have a couple of your fellow competitors on the series, in their own words, say that they're not, they don't have the most athletic bodies. But bowling is obviously a sport where athleticism is valued and is beneficial. How has the training and the actual kind of the physical science of the sport evolved since you first picked up a bowling ball?
Yeah, well, listen, you can point that camera at any sport and you'll see the evolution of the physical athleticism of any athlete, male or female for that matter. You want to go back and look at the NBA in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, have a look at their physiques back then, and now you look at them today. And what we're noticing for us at the bowling level is that stereotype, that Al Bundy kind of like that burger eating, beer drinking physique, that doesn't exist on our tour anymore. It is filled with younger, athletic, stronger competitors. And so what I've noticed is if you don't keep up, physically, then you're going to get left behind no matter how strong you might be mentally. So people then will ask, well, what is it about bowling that you need to be athletically fit for? And I say, well, again, if you knew what we did, you would understand we will compete between 6 and 8 hours a day, 5 days straight, under constant barrages of mental decisions and anxiety and pressures and stress. And so as the week goes on, you are getting more and more tired. So you need to have a really strong core. You need to have a really strong lower half. Your legs need to be underneath you and strong so you can deliver your shot as consistently as possible for a really long duration. And these kids, I'm talking, they're in their early 20s and they're cut from a different cloth than, when I was coming up as an athlete. But I think it's fantastic because, one, it's good for you. It's good for you to work out. It's actually healthy and you live a lot longer. And so you also perform at your peak performance. Whatever your potential peak is, you're going to get closer to that when your body is feeling it. And so part of me is really thankful that those younger kids kind of started to come through. And not to say that I was ever unhealthy or super overweight, but trimming some of those little extra, kilos of fat off and turning them into muscle and developing that ability to be extremely durable for a very long time has made me step up my own game. And I'm very grateful, to be honest, that evolution, not just in bowling, but in all sports, male or female, is happening, because I think we're seeing sports at its peak performance in history. And I think that's part of the reason why is the physicality changes.
And you talk about the young guns coming in. I think it was Cameron, who was a multi-sport athlete, who had said he had played every sport in high school, and bowling was the one that he landed on. And it just ups everybody else's game when everyone has to meet the moment in that way, right?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. If you meet Cameron, you'll see he's 6'2", broad shoulders. He could tackle a truck coming towards him. So when he throws a bowling ball down the lane, it can be intimidating to a lot of guys that have never seen a bowling ball get thrown that fast down a lane before.
I think he addresses that in the show too, where he was like, you could knock a lot of parts in my game, but nobody throws a ball harder than I do.
True that. He may not know where it's going all the time, but when it hits the pins, it doesn't matter. It just explodes them.
Listen, you need a fastball pitcher sometimes, no matter where it's actually going.
Absolutely.
You know, PBA has been on television, I think, for a lot longer than anybody realizes. I remember when I was in high school, at least, it was definitely on Fox Sports. You hear in the series a lot about guys talking about making the show, that when you make the cut that actually get to the televised matches in the tournament, that is obviously a huge goal. What role has TV, and now we're going to see streaming as well, played in the development and the growth of your sport?
Yeah, television is our way of advertising, and so when you make the show, that gives you personally an opportunity to promote yourself. Hey, I'm on camera and there are going to be, 1 million people watching this show at this particular time. And I either perform really well in front of them or I perform really bad in front of them. But again, making the show is the first step to winning the tournament. You cannot win the tournament if you don't make the show. And so that's the last stage of our tournament. So we'll have qualifying rounds, we'll have cup rounds, we'll have match play rounds, and then the final round is the show. And that's what you're fighting to make. For us, being on television for the growth of the game is so vital. It is so vital. You think about anything that's not accessible, whether it's on regular TV channels, cable, or even streaming. Like if you can't find it somewhere, I promise you it's probably not growing. So for us, it's very, very important that when we do make television, that the bowlers that have made it attempt to give the best performances that they can, not just from a score perspective, but entertaining value. We want to make sure that we are great to watch because, if people stop watching us, then the money that we do have in the game, whilst not a lot, we'll lose. Sponsors will not want to pour money into us either for our own personal endorsements or for the tour itself. And so it's very important that that element of the game stays very strong. And we've seen a few hiccups over the last few years with our relationships with network television. We're currently with the CW network for a couple of seasons, which is also, now a part of, I believe, Paramount Plus, which puts us on their streaming network. And I also think ESPN Plus having access to us is growing, which is great for us at a competitive level. But the other thing, which I don't know if you experience this, but like when the Australian Open tennis comes into town, when that's on, tennis gets a huge bump in people going to buy a racket or go and play tennis because it's in front of your eyes. You kind of get the bug to go do it. And that's what happens with bowling. When you change the channel and you see bowling on TV, you will watch it. Maybe you enjoy it, maybe you don't. But in the back of your head, you remember, I can actually go and do this. I can go and take my family to go do this thing. So from a sport perspective, it is critical that we stay very visible.
Well, and you are extremely visible even on your own channels. You have this pretty robust YouTube channel and on your socials, you post from there. Are you comfortable promoting yourself? Not all athletes are, especially athletes who play in individual sports. So it's always interesting to me when it's kind of become a part of the job requirement in some ways.
It very much has become part of the job requirement now. You don't have to do it, but doing it and doing it as well as you can it does. It helps grow your branding. It helps offer you a point of difference to a competitor for sponsorship deals and things like that. The one thing that I would advise anyone that's listening that wants to grow their own social network is be authentic. Because if you try to play a role that is not you, if you try to promote brands or products that you do not like, but you say you do, it will not take very long for the public to be aware that you're a charlatan. And once that happens, that's it. That's the end of it. So try to be yourself and then align brandings or align products, or when you are posting something, the words that you're using, make them yours. Don't just plug it into an AI generator and have it all done automatically, because again, your fans and the people, your audience that wants to hear from you, that's what they want when you're an individual poster. They want to hear your thoughts. Maybe you don't agree with everything your favorite athlete has to say, but also maybe you do. And so you've got to try to find that honest and sincerity, because it won't take very long for the rug to be pulled out from underneath your feet.
I ask this question of almost every athlete I interview. Are you able to bowl for pleasure anymore?
Wow, that is a really tricky question. I think the pleasure that I have bowling is different to when I watch my mates bowl. So, occasionally I will bowl with friends or my children, and I'll watch them, and the joy that they have when they get a strike or they make a cool spare, like, I am very envious. I don't experience that type of joy. But the love that I have for this game still makes it pleasurable for me to bowl. And even on the bad days, sometimes I'll curse the sport. Sometimes I'll bang my head against the wall, like I said earlier, and just be like, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this to myself? But ultimately, in the end, it's because it matters to me so much that the highs and the lows of that love, again, like anything else, my kids, I am unconditionally and will forever be in love with my kids. Doesn't mean I think they're rat bags sometimes, and I, want to rip my own hair out when they're doing something that they shouldn't be doing. So I look at bowling the same type of way in terms of pleasure and fun. Is, yes, ultimately unconditional love for the game, but we have our moments together.
But you still will go to like a friend's birthday party at the alley, even though the level of bowling won't be up to your standard.
Yeah, maybe it's not quote unquote a birthday party essentially, but it might be, hey, before we go out to the pub later, why don't we roll a game or two? Or, maybe, like, for example, most recently we had my 25-year high school reunion. And so we decided to have it at the bowling center, where we all spent some time in high school. So that was a really fun experience, and bowling there, it wasn't about the score, although I will say that every single one that was at the reunion had mentioned that if they were to beat me, that would be cause for me to retire from the professional side of the game. So there was a little pressure when I think two people started out with like 3 strikes in a row. And I did not start out with 3 strikes in a row. And so they were chirping from the side about retirement. And there was a little pressure there, but I quickly caught up to them and made sure I stayed in front of everyone. But that was a fun night.
You can't take it easy with your mates no matter what.
No. They wouldn't. Oh, my goodness. My mates, if you knew my mates, if they ever beat me at the game, they would be, I would have to remove them from my friend. I would have to leave the friend group. I could never be around them ever again.
Well, finally, Jason, Belmo, thank you. This has been wonderful. I love talking to athletes and learning about sports that aren't necessarily mainstream. You're now filming. So season 1 of Born to Bowl ends on a little bit of an ominous note. We're toward the end of the last episode. We're not quite sure what's going to happen with the TV contracts. And as you mentioned, and as the series concludes with, there thankfully is a 2026 season. There is a new TV deal. What are you looking forward to currently filming season 2, currently playing in this PBA Tour season? What are you looking forward to for the next couple of months?
Yeah, well, you know what? You never know how they're going to edit a documentary. I mean, we record so many hours, so many conversations, and then, we have 30-minute episodes. And what can you fit in a 30-minute episode of all those hours? So, sometimes I'm like, I have no idea what I've said. I have no idea what they will use. And so when I watch it, suppose I'm kind of like you. I'm really watching it for the first time, even though it was me and I was doing those things. I just don't know how they're going to edit it. I think this season for me, and maybe not to spoil so much, but it has been a season of near misses for me, and that has really been difficult for me to, even at this stage in my career, to be as successful as I have. Like, losing still hurts. And to have so many near misses has been really difficult. So I think from my perspective and my arc through this series is kind of watching someone who has won so much now not win so much. And that's, for me, has been a really difficult experience, but a challenge nonetheless. And I'm hoping that that's what this season for my episode, quote unquote, my part of the episodes shows, like, holy shit, like, this guy, this matters to him to this day. Like, this means so much that you can see it in his face when he loses, that it is just heartbreaking. So I'm hoping that the next few months we see a victory or two, and we can finish the arc off. But what I will say is everything that you see through this documentary is exactly how it is. It's very authentic for the most part.
Well, that's great. Jason Belmonte, thank you so much for joining us, and good luck with the rest of your season. And I believe you're eligible for the Hall of Fame in 2028, so we will be looking forward to that as well.
Yes, I'm very hopeful. I get inducted into that. That is the dream. That is the goal.
Well, thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks so much for tuning into Sportly. Tune in next week and every week after as we dive into another great story. And if you enjoyed this episode, rate and review us on your favorite podcast app or come and tell us on Instagram. You'll find us at SportlyPod. Sportly is an Immigrantly media production. This episode was produced by Paroma Chakravarti. Our executive producer is Sadia Khan. Our sound designer and editor is Paroma Chakravarti. Our theme music was created by Simon Hutchinson. Other music by Epidemic Sound. Tune back in next week and every week after for more Sportly.